80% of adults in the US have gambled at least once. 2 to 3% of US adults, about 6 million people, struggle with a gambling disorder. All right, that's 6 million people. And men, like I said, are nearly twice as likely as women to become problem gamblers. They need to make sure that the people who are making them a lot of money continue to make them a lot of money, which was what the video was talking about. The people who are losing money, they will give them free money to lose because they're going to just return it right back to them. And the people who are making money, who are taking money from them, they're going to give them sanctions, they're going to give them restrictions and limitations, they're going to ban them. And then for the people who are making them money, they're going to basically make them money until they become bankrupt. What is going on, everyone? Welcome back. My name is Dr. Phil Sarpon. I'm a clinical psychologist, and this channel is dedicated to all things psychology, wellness, and graduate school. Today, we are going to be talking about a topic that has been coming up for quite some time to talk about this topic, and it's the topic of gambling and addiction. Now, part of the reason that I feel like it's really important to discuss this topic today is that this is becoming more of a prevalent issue. And it's becoming something that I think is really something to look into. One of the things that I've seen, even just with men specifically, is there is a coping strategy that is being used to deal with very uncomfortable emotions and thoughts and negative feelings in ways that are maybe more so centered around some form of addiction. Could be pornography, could be gambling, could be food addiction, could be a number of different types of addiction. And this impacts everybody, not just men, but specifically we're going to be looking into gambling addiction today. I actually wanted to show a clip that kind of discusses a little bit of what we're talking about today. So I'm actually going to go ahead and play that for right now.
Not only can you bet on the Yankees to win, but you can bet on the Yankees to win and Garrett Cole to have a certain number of strikeouts and Aaron Judge to hit a home run. And the products are a lot of fun. And in particular, what they allow people to do is risk a very small amount of money and win a very large amount of money all in one game.
These bets are incredibly lucrative for the sports books. Why? Because they're very hard to hit, but also they're very hard to calculate what the right price should be. When you start to add all these random, weird, correlated or negatively correlated events, the math to figure out what the fair price should be becomes very, very complex. Hardly any of us can do it. So the sports book can then bake into those bets a very, very big margin.
When you got overs and unders, you're in it every time they throw the ball, kick the ball, dribble the ball. Now that bet's got you watching every inning, half, round, period, set, hole, a lap.
A typical bet on whether a team will cover the spread, the type of bet that used to be the bread and butter of Las Vegas sportsbook or barroom bookies, would deliver a 5 to 6% return to the sportsbook. A single game parlay, by comparison, will typically return up to 30% to the sportsbook.
All my kids are addicted, and well, I shouldn't say addicted, I don't mean that, but they like the wrong games. You know why? They like the parlays, and they somehow think that a parlay is easy. Could you please tell people how hard it is to win on a parlay?
Well, you don't win as much, but when you win more. And, that's kind of why people like it, because, when they win, they get a big multiple on their money.
This makes these bets sort of the credit default swap of sports betting. It's sort of like that scene in The Big Short with the Jenga pieces. That's what these are. You're putting together a financial product that as you build these things up, it's worse and worse for you, right? The chances of you winning, but also how bad the bet you're making gets worse and worse. And this is a hard thing for people to understand because I think most Americans just assume every bet's a bad bet. The house always wins. Of course, whenever I make a bet, I'm supposed to lose. So what difference does it make? I'd rather get the biggest possible payout for the few times that I do win. And that's the problem with that thinking, which I think is very prevalent among gamblers in America today, is that it's not actually true in sports betting. In sports betting, you actually can win, and you actually can have an advantage and have the best of it when you're making your bets. Fundamentally, people should want sports books and betting on sports to be fair. And I don't know that it is fair right now. And I don't know that there's any real pressure being placed on sports books to be fair to their customers. Their marketing and what they advertise to people is that you can win and that you can win a lot of money.
All right, boys, who we betting on?
But the fact is that if you show any real ability to effectively handicap a game and beat the sports book, they will limit your bets and essentially kick you out of the sports book. They will not let you win. Can you talk to me a little bit about how sports books treat you once you start winning?
They don't want to accept your bets. If you're in a VIP program, either a VIP host will be nice and tell you, sorry, you've been limited, you're no longer wanted here. A lot of the time they'll just ghost you, which kind of sucks. But yeah, sportsbooks don't want to accept winning customers.
Can you tell me about what those VIP programs are like?
Yeah, they're great while you're in them. You get all sorts of perks, whether it's deposit bonuses or profit boosts or free sports tickets, all of these things.
A lot of winning bettors do everything they can to hide their identity from the sports books, including bet under other people's accounts, so that the sports books don't know it's them.
Well, I have other friends who have accounts, and I have people who will put on, their action on my behalf, and I'll have a Google sheet that tracks P&L and payments and everything like that, and what's owed where.
Sportsbooks have always profiled their players for people who are sharp or skilled bettors who can win long term. But as sports betting has grown in the United States, they have so many bets to manage, so many players.
You have almost an infinite number of choices that you can bet on.
At this point, bookmakers are computer programs and not people who are experts in their craft. They're operating at such high volume and speed that it's easier just to boot the winners and keep the losers.
I would get these promotions because I was in their diamond VIP status, and they were talking about, when I make Onyx, I'll be able to get free tickets, etc. So I was excited about that, and I asked for tickets for certain US Open event, and he's like, if you make Onyx, I can probably hook that up for you. So I was upping my volume with that goal of hitting Onyx, and eventually found myself not able to bet as much as I'd want to on certain tennis-related events. There would be a message that would come up on the app that says your bet is too large. You're able to bet up to X amount, which pretty much said to me that they wanted me to bet on the site. Then once I was winning on the site, they didn't want me to bet on the site.
I think the issue for me is one of transparency, right? You shouldn't be able to have advertisements that say sign up and win, and then if you actually can win, they'll kick you out. You shouldn't be able to allow people to come in and lose as much money as possible while restricting winners. You can't restrict winners and then expand limits for losers, all while saying that you're a fair place for anybody to play. That's pretty deceptive in my opinion. So it's not just the limiting, but it's the lack of transparency around it.
I just got this great NFL offer, guaranteed, all up front. And this one's going to be hard to pass up.
DraftKings is not able to succeed because of some random guy on the street who's placing a $10 same game parlay. They're able to succeed because 1 in 100 customers is losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And to be clear, if you look at the distribution of alcohol sales, the vast majority of it comes from people who drink way too much alcohol. But liquor stores aren't able to prey on those customers in the same way. They can't send them push notifications that, you haven't deposited in a couple of days. Why don't you come back and we'll give you one for on us? There's recently that case in the Wall Street Journal with a woman who had a family and she just mortgaged her house. Not great, but that's the kind of customer that even if DraftKings isn't saying they want, that's the kind of customer who's actually paying their bills.
There were so many times when I wanted to quit and I couldn't because the industry kept luring me back in, essentially.
That thing that we refer to as ban or bankrupt, I believe, is the problem. If you're a very good player, that is that you have an advantage over the house. They are going to limit or ban you. It's oftentimes document, we're not going to take your action, close your account, or we're going to limit you to $1.90, On the bankrupt part, if you're not a very sharp gambler, you have failings and you'll go for every goofy parlay, and that's the bankrupting.
Right, because for players they've flagged as being winners, they'll limit them. Everybody else, it's like, they'll take whatever you want to bet.
What the goal is not to manage risk, it's to eliminate the risk.
That was a lot. Oh, wow. Yeah, I have a lot of words to say. So first of all, I will link down below the video for that I just shared. It's sports betting, what DraftKings and FanDuel don't want you to know by a YouTube site called More Perfect Union. Definitely encourage you to watch the full thing. I think it's a really great video. And it's a perfect kind of introduction to basically what we're going to talk about today. As a psychologist, this is something I describe a lot to my patients is, okay, what exactly is addiction? Because addiction is kind of this weird thing where I think we understand that there's some sort of chemical component to it. But I think a lot of people don't understand how pervasive it actually is. And so when we talk about addiction, we're talking about a brain-based disorder. Addiction itself is something that is hijacking the brain's reward system. When you think about, and oftentimes people have seen TikToks on this, videos on this, but the dopamine pathway, right? The dopamine pathway in the mesolimbic system is a circuit that includes the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, which includes the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. When someone gambles and wins, or even anticipates a win, this is what's really interesting about addiction. It's not even just about getting the reward. Oftentimes, it's the pursuit of the reward. Oftentimes, we see dopamine spikes even before, like, for example, if someone's addicted to food, right? They are on their way to McDonald's. They're driving to McDonald's. They haven't even eaten the burger yet. They haven't even tasted the salty fries. They're on the way. They're about a mile away. Their taste buds are ringing, right? They're salivating. Their stomach is growling. There is dopamine hitting like crazy, firing off on all cylinders. They are in the pursuit of the reward, and they are already activated, right? And so when they eat the hamburger and the fries, like, listen, like, yeah, they're still getting some dopamine hits, but that dopamine hit was hitting way before they actually ate the burger, right? So we know that dopamine gets released even in the pursuit of the reward. And then that rush of dopamine is going to be what reinforces the behavior, and it's going to wire the brain to crave it even more. And I always say this, but it's training someone to want what they want, or desire what they want, but like it less, right? So over time, the brain adapts to this stimulation. It releases less dopamine. So you can eat the burger, you can gamble, you can go into the activity, but you're actually getting less dopamine release, which means the person needs bigger risk and more frequent gambling to feed the same rush, to get the same type of dopamine hit. And that's what causes a lot of compulsive gambling. Is sometimes what happens is that you're getting more of a spike of dopamine in the pursuit of the gambling than the gambling itself. The gambling itself is now actually decreasing a lot more of the dopamine release, but the pursuit of it, going on the app and looking through, like, that is now actually what you're activated from. And that's what you're getting that high and that dopamine hit from. And what neuroimaging studies have shown is that there's, for problem gamblers, they often have reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the area of your brain responsible for judgment and thinking and processing. And it's almost like gambling kind of turns this area of your brain off. And it's now, right? So you need the ability to make decisions and to control your impulses and to have some self-reflection. When that area of your brain is turned off, you're in the high reward system of your brain, right? And so now gambling addiction is not just affecting your emotions in terms of, wow, I feel so happy, I feel so alive when I do this. It's impairing your judgment. It's impairing your ability to think things through. It's fueling that risk-taking, and it's deepening much more of an emotional isolation. People talk about it all the time, but gambling is one of those silent killers that no one knows if you're gambling, right? It's all on your phone. It could be in the room, right? In the walls of your house or your apartment. No one can know. And we know that there's a lot of suicide correlations with gambling because people and their family members, their friends, they will not even know about it, right? And so when you think about gambling from a cognitive perspective, like I said, it's impacting the prefrontal cortex and the ability to think things through. When you think about it from an emotional perspective, it's creating that dopamine high, the feeling of ecstasy, of pleasure, of reward. And then when you think about it from a behavioral perspective, that behavior of the addiction becomes a lot more compulsive. So it's hitting you from a cognitive, an emotional, and a behavioral perspective. It's also hitting, if you think about classical conditioning from your Psych 101 class, oftentimes when you see the app, right, when you see the stimulus, you already get the little bit of a dopamine hit, right? You haven't even started gambling yet, but the app or the notification when it bings, right? Whenever you get some type of trigger, then that classical conditioning can start. we know a lot about operant conditioning in that whenever we're, let's say, for example, when we're not engaging in the activity, so when we're not engaging in gambling, sometimes there can be a discomfort, right? So there can be some negative reinforcement. So in order to remove the discomfort, we reinforce it with gambling, right? Which therefore reinforces a lot of that behavior. So classical conditioning is going on, operant conditioning is going on. You have the cognitive, you have the emotional and the psychological, and then you have the behavioral aspects. If you want to throw in the social aspects too, right? So if your friends are gambling, if you see it on TV commercials all the time, if you see it in movies, if you see your favorite movie stars and your athletes doing it, if gambling is normalized in society, it's becoming a normal part of everyday society. It seems like everybody's doing it. Your boss is doing it. Your girlfriend's doing it. Your spouse and partner is doing it. Your kids are like, now we are socially constructing a society in which it is becoming much more normal behavior. And I would say this behavior isn't normal. I think it's actually abnormal, and it's creating a lot of chaos in people's lives silently. Right? When you combine this with the loneliness epidemic in which a number of Western societies, a number of countries, and even just in general Western society has said, where, Western society has said, there are people right now, most of society, who don't have two best friends, who go home from their work and they're alone. And they don't have people in their life to talk to. They don't have social relationships and connections. They don't have social support. If they were in a pickle in the middle of the night, they wouldn't know who to call. And we have this situation where when you combine the loneliness epidemic and the isolation that is prevalent in our society with men, and specifically the things, again, from a statistical perspective, men are more likely to engage in addictive behaviors. You combine all of those things and you have a recipe for disaster, right? And I've said it before in previous videos, but the root cause of this is disconnection, right? If we were to look at the underlying problem, it's disconnection. It's disconnection from the people that we love, that we could connect to. It's isolation. It's a loss of meaningful relationships. It's a desire to want to numb with this behavior. It's using this behavior as a distraction from all of the other problems that are going on. And so, just like gambling and pornography and video games and alcohol, there is an avoidance of uncomfortable emotions that people are avoiding, and they're utilizing gambling as a way to feel alive, right? To feel in control and to distract themselves from the internal pain of what's going on. Let me name some statistics for y'all. So over 80% of adults in the US have gambled at least once. 2 to 3% of US adults, about 6 million people, struggle with a gambling disorder. All right. That's 6 million people. And men, like I said, are nearly twice as likely as women to become problem gamblers. Again, this goes back to addiction. The thing about addiction is you are engaging in a behavior you want to stop and you can't. You want to refrain because you know that it's harming you. So for example, if you're gambling your savings and you're investing, if you're taking other people's money to gamble, right? But you just can't help it. You're so compulsive with it. Now it is an addiction because you're engaging in something that, first of all, you can't stop. That second of all, you know that it's wrong for you to do, but you continue to do anyways. And you are wanting to do this behavior more, but you're liking it less. You're liking it less because it's impacting your life negatively, but regardless, you continue to do it. And the pursuit of this is actually driving up much of that dopamine high. So when you look at this problem, and just like the video was saying, here's the thing, whoever with these gambling companies, I can only imagine they must have hired some very diabolical, sinister psychologists, because gambling is all just human psychology, right? What they're doing is they're looking at it all from a profit perspective. In order for them to profit from this, they need to take control over the situation. So they need to do a few things. They need to make sure that the people who are making them a lot of money continue to make them a lot of money, which was what the video was talking about. The people who are losing money, they will give them free money to lose because they're going to just return it right back to them. And the people who are making money, who are taking money from them, they're going to limit. They're going to give them sanctions. They're going to give them restrictions and limitations. They're going to ban them. And then for the people who are making the money, they're going to basically make them money until they become bankrupt. And that is the goal, right? And so I'm sure they had some diabolical psychologists to come in and say, okay, this is what you need to do for the app to make it as appealing as possible. This is what you need to do in terms of notifications. This is what you need to do in terms of targeting certain people who might be more susceptible and vulnerable to becoming a problem gambler. This is what you need to do. This is how you need to email them. This is what you need to say. This is how, and the list goes on and on and on and on. And again, I can only imagine you have these sinister, diabolical psychologists in the back room thinking to themselves, wow, we've really sold our souls to the devil because we were meant to help people. And now we're using our psychology and knowledge and research to actually become these, these contributors to making people slaves of this, essentially, right? And like I mentioned before, you know, a cocaine addiction, a heroin addiction, alcohol addiction, those things are harder to hide, right? But gambling, you can hide it. You can go to family functions. You can be in relationships. Now, if you're in a relationship and you share finances with your partner, yeah, hopefully they're gonna find out about it, right? If they see what's going on. But you know, there's still things you can do, right? You can hide your money. You can lie. You can steal. Right. And so there's ways to hide this disorder, which I think is the more sinister part of this behavior is that it really, you just don't know. You don't know who's struggling until it's probably too late. So a lot of people have been asking me about the why. And, you know, I don't want to generalize the why to everybody because everyone could have a certain reason or desire of why they're gambling. But I think if you were to look at maybe certain patterns in the research, you're going to see there's a desire for control, right? There's a false sense of control when it comes to gambling. When you go on the app, you get to choose, right? And that illusion of control can give you a sense of feeling powerful, right? Gambling also is selling a fantasy. It's selling an image of you winning. They have pictures and videos and commercials of people winning. And then it goes back to this whole idea of like, you see the person winning. You don't see the person winning. You see yourself winning. So instinctively, you insert yourself into that image of, I won $1 million. I won $100,000, right? And they're selling a fantasy. So it's the illusion of control, which makes them feel powerful. And it's the selling of a fantasy, which is based on the imagery, the advertising, the commercials, all of that is driven to sell you a fantasy. And then when you know people who might win, right? Or the idea of winning, sometimes you might actually win. And I think that's what's so devious about this, right? Sometimes you might actually win. You might win $100. You might win $50. If we were to do a data analysis of all of your wins and losses, and you were to record that in an Excel file, we would probably see that you've lost more than you've won. But because of the fantasy, because of the illusion of control, the idea of winning, I've won before in the past, I think I can win again. There's a false sense of confidence. I'm a risk taker. Risk takers are seen as attractive, right? I could be somebody. And when you're caught in the loop of isolation and loneliness, and, you know, if you really think about it, your job isn't that great. Your relationships are stale. You know, there's a sense of like, this is what is giving me some sense of pleasure, some sense of a feeling alive, right? But the reality is that most people lose. There's some statistics. The average gambling loss for problem gamblers is estimated to be about $55,000 to $90,000 annually. At first I was like, oh, that's just like over the course of time. No, annually, $55,000 to $90,000 annually. Do you know what you could do with $90,000? You could put a deposit, a down payment in a house. You could put that into investing, a savings account. I mean, goodness gracious, you could do a lot with that type of money. And, you know, there's a sense of, you know, gambling to me, I think is similar to with video games. And maybe I'll do a video about video games in the future, but there's an escapism, right? There's an escapism from reality into fantasy. I'm saying these things, this is not to shed judgment. Here's the thing about any type of addiction. We don't understand addiction isn't this sort of like, hey, get over it. Addiction is very much like it's a mental health thing to really take seriously, because you don't tell someone who's severely depressed to just get over it. Addiction is a physiological, it's a, like I said, cognitive, behavioral, and psychological thing that's happening to your body. Your brain has been hijacked from the dopamine release that's happened and that's taken place. This is a disease. Yeah. Like someone who has heart disease, someone who has a chronic health illness, we would never make fun of them. We would never say, oh, this is all your fault. I think the thing that's hard with addiction is that we say, well, these people got themselves into it. And yes, that could be the case. But honestly, I mean, any one of us could get into something. There could be a physiological craving that I have never experienced yet in my life, that if I were to experience it, I could be addicted to it. We as human beings naturally crave to feel good. To feel good is a natural human response. And so, yes, there's some personal autonomy and choice behind addiction, but you have to understand that once addiction occurs, the body and the brain and the mind has been hijacked. What goes from a personal choice has turned into a disease that needs to be treated, and not ridiculed, not shamed, but treated like professional treatment. And so I think that's really important to kind of consider. With any addiction, someone's doing it for a reason. And if you judge and you critique the behavior, you miss out on the underlying need that person is looking for. Either they're running towards gambling because they're running away from something. What is the thing that they're running away from? What is the thing that they're using gambling to self-medicate from? Is it depression? Is it insecurity? Is it a fear of failure? They're turning towards something that gives them a sense of meeting the need in the moment, but the need is still there. And if you meet the need, whether the need is loneliness or isolation or worthlessness or inadequacy, if you meet that need, right, then you can turn away, you can help the person turn away from addiction. And so what is the cure? It's a great question. That is a great question. So, as a psychologist, my goal is to always, again, create a safe space and normalize the behavior, right? Normalize it in a sense of like, listen, you're human for getting yourself into this. It doesn't discredit the personal choice and autonomy that you have. It doesn't mean that you are right for what you're doing. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that, okay, I can see how this could happen. Because honestly, this could happen to anyone, and it's actually happening to a lot of people. So you're not the only person, right? What is common with any addiction, and I've mentioned this before, is that usually there's a disconnection. So you want to disconnect from the behavior and you want to connect to something. You can't just remove the behavior. You have to replace it with something worthwhile, something meaningful, something that meets the underlying need that person's really looking for. And oftentimes this can be done in a community setting, right? This can be done within the context of connecting to other people. And I don't mind 12-step programs. This is something that I recommend for my patients. I think the research studies are kind of mixed as it relates to 12-step, but here's the thing. I would never recommend 12-step as the one and only solution. I think 12-step is a good aid. So for example, Gambling Anonymous puts you into a community, and there's virtual meetings, there's in-person meetings, most likely in any part of the country, and you're in a community where people are struggling with the same thing. I think that's important. So there's awareness that this is a problem, and I'm going to put myself in the context of other people who are also facing the same problem. And then I'm going to study the people who have been in the program who have maintained sobriety, right, from gambling for a long period of time. I'm going to study their behaviors. I might ask them to be my sponsor. So a sponsor would be someone that perhaps you would call whenever you're feeling a desire to gamble, whenever you're feeling a need to gamble, whenever you're feeling an itch to gamble, you call your sponsor. And if you don't reach your sponsor, you leave a voice message or a voicemail, right? And the goal is to, instead of connecting to the behavior, you connect to a real human being. So you connect to your sponsor every day, either by phone call or text, or you go to meetings. Go to 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings a week. And now that you are in the larger context of community, maybe you get other people's phone numbers. Now you have 5, 10, 15, 20 people on your phone that whenever you feel a desire to gamble, you call the person and you talk to them and you share, you know what, I have this desire to gamble. I need help, right? And they can help you kind of walk you off the cliff, help you maybe convince you to not gamble, right? And then by going to meetings and sharing consistently, you start to get the help that you need. Therapy can also help, right? Like I said, there could be some underlying things related to the gambling problem. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be worthlessness, it could be inadequacy. And so maybe we can do some cognitive behavioral training around those cognitive distortions and those negative thinking around some of the things that you feel, right? And so the therapy can help with the cognitive part. Is there some underlying trauma? We want to tackle that too, right? So the therapy can help with that part. I want to really hark on both these things because I think this is important. Only 28% of men with mental health issues seek professional help. A lot of men are dealing with issues and they're not getting help. And we have men who die by suicide 3.9 times more often than women. And gambling disorder is often associated with one of the highest suicide rates among addictions. It's also, again, like I said, one of the things that mostly men tend to navigate towards too. And, you know, if you're a man, you're supposed to have it all together. You're not supposed to need any help. You're not supposed to cry. You're also told all of these negative stereotypes about who you should be as a man. No addiction is healed in the context of being alone. It's just not, you just don't see it in the research. And so healing truly comes in the context of community. And gambling, I believe, conceptually is the replacer of friendship for men. It gives you the high, it gives you the risk taking, it gives you the identity. When you win, you feel powerful, you feel like a man, you feel tough, you feel like, oh, I know a lot, whatever, right? And, you know, even as a psychologist and as a therapist, I get a lot of men who come to me and their spouses don't know about their gambling problem. And so there's a lot of lies, there's a lot of secrecy, there's a lot of broken promises. It's draining the financial resources, which, you know, as men, right, like even as young boys, we were told, oh, you got to be the provider, you got to be the provider, you got to be the provider. What happens when you get into a situation where now you are engaged into an activity and an addiction that is financially draining the resources from your family? What you were told your whole life in terms of being a provider, you are essentially now the opposite of that. And how much shame could be surrounded with that, right? There was a study done in UK that found that 2/3 of problem gamblers reported strained family relationships. Now, again, I just told you, healing, when it comes to addiction, healing comes in the form of social connections and social relationships. If gambling is straining relationships, the few relationships that someone has, what do you think that's going to do for them? They're going to continue to isolate, which means that they're probably going to continue to gamble. Okay, this is a cyclical issue that's happening. It's a cyclical issue that's happening that's filled with more and more disconnection and more shame. And as you know, Brene Brown is someone that's a leading voice in the aspect of shame, but shame teaches us to hide. And it teaches us to mold and enmesh ourselves with an identity that is just not true, right? So instead of I did something bad, I tell myself that I am bad, right? There's a difference between I did something bad and I am a bad person, right? Because I am bad means that I am identifying with this characteristic. And it gives no room for change. It gives no room for growth. It gives no room for transformation. It is restrictive, it is limiting, and it is final, right? I think other than for men to go to a therapist and then also the Gambling Anonymous, I think there needs to be a push for real friendships and connections with other men. And of course, I'm talking specifically about men. Women struggle with gambling as well. But again, like I said, the research shows that women tend to have social outlets and are much more willing to seek mental health treatment than men. And so that's part of the reason why I'm focusing on men. But the thing about for men, I think for us and for other men to mentor other men is there has to be this social support system to really challenge men, to support them, to call them out with love, but to form real friendships with other men. When men take care of other men, that is a hope in humanity that I still have, right? Because it means that there's honest connection, there's emotional encouragement, there's community building, there's a safe place for men to lay out all of their insecurities and vulnerabilities, and then there's I feel like again there's something that starts to happen where the core need for connection that's rooted in disconnection for gambling now starts to feel, as the person starts to feel more connected and more loved and more belonged in a community, I believe it becomes easier to refrain from the gambling. It's easier said than done. A lot of the studies will show that this is, it takes some time. Like even if someone's in Gambling Anonymous, it's not going to take just a few months for them to get over it. Like this is probably years of commitment, of going to meetings, having a sponsor, having people to talk to, building a community, getting connected, right? Healing social relationships that perhaps were burdened or were strained because of the financial burden that the person put as it relates to gambling. There's repair and restoration that needs to be done. But I think as this video, I encourage people to watch the full length of this video. There's something that needs to be done. From a cognitive perspective and dealing with the cognitive distortions and negative thinking, from an emotional perspective in terms of dealing with the shame, from a behavioral perspective in terms of formulating other healthier behaviors, from a cultural and social perspective. And this is, again, I didn't even really touch into the systemic issues of this, like the apps that are preying, that are predators to people who could be vulnerable. That's a whole nother fight in itself. Like when we talk about policy making, when we talk about the push for policy and advocacy, the things that we've done with the tobacco industry in terms of limiting their ability to advertise on TV and also taxing them when they do advertise. And there's just no regulations for gambling right now. And so, yes, there's a personal responsibility that I think each individual person should have. But at the same time, from a societal perspective, there needs to be a communal responsibility for us to address the systemic issues that are going on. Commercials, actors, and celebrities advertising these products, like what is going on? What is going on, right? And so to call those things out and to seek for systemic limitations, restrictions, and sanctions on these apps is absolutely vital. And, it's one thing to try and control your own personal environment. It's a whole nother thing to see ads and marketing and commercials on it, right? It would be like the alcoholic that is trying to do their best to avoid the liquor store, but then they show up to work and there's alcohol, or they show up to their house and their spouse has brought alcohol. Like we have to, in terms of addictions in general, environmental stimulus control is absolutely imperative to the health and the healing of the person or the victim that's embarking on some form of recovery journey. And so these are issues that I can't solve, unfortunately, in 45 to 15 minutes, but I will say that hopefully talking about the neurobiology, talking about the cognitive, behavioral, and emotional and social elements of this, and talking about, there are tools, there are things that people can go into, like the Gambling Anonymous and therapy, that can also be very beneficial as well. At the end of the day, the person has to do the work, but I think we as a society also need to do our work and our part to make this easier. It's a net positive for everybody when we have this much more under control. You know, if you're a future therapist or a psychologist or a current psychologist, maybe put it down in the link below or in the comment section below, what things you've done for your patients or your clients. What resources, what research articles have you shared? Let's create hopefully a community that gives resources to people who are going through this really difficult situation. And hopefully let's be allies, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, I could be an addict to anything. I really, truly believe that connection is the key to healing.